Chapter 19. That one should avoid being despised and hated. I have already discussed the most important characteristics a prince should have. Now I want to briefly cover the rest under one general rule. As I mentioned before, a prince must carefully avoid anything that makes him hated or despised. If he succeeds in this, he has done his part. He will not face any danger from other criticisms. Above all, a prince makes himself hated by being greedy and by taking the property and women of his subjects. He must keep his hands off both. As long as you do not touch the property or honor of the majority of men, they will live happily. Then you only have to deal with the ambition of a few, which you can easily crush in many ways. A prince makes himself despised if he is seen as unpredictable, frivolous, weak, cowardly, or indecisive. He must guard against these flaws as if they were a dangerous reef. Instead, he must ensure his actions show greatness, courage, seriousness, and strength. When settling disputes among his subjects, his decisions must be final. He must build such a strong reputation that no one even dreams of tricking or manipulating him. A prince who creates this impression is highly respected, and it is very hard to conspire against a man who is highly respected. As long as he is known as an excellent leader who is admired by his people, enemies will find it difficult to attack him. A prince only has two real fears. One comes from inside, from his own subjects. The other comes from outside, from foreign powers. He can defend himself against foreign powers by having a strong army and good allies. If his army is strong, he will always have good allies. And as long as external affairs remain peaceful, internal affairs will remain peaceful, unless a conspiracy has already started. Even if a foreign power does attack, a well-prepared prince who follows my advice and never gives up will easily fight off every assault, just like Nobis the Spartan did. But when it comes to his subjects, if external affairs are peaceful, his only fear is a secret conspiracy. A prince can easily protect himself from this by making sure he is neither hated nor despised, and by keeping the people satisfied. As I explained at length earlier, keeping the people satisfied is absolutely necessary. In fact, one of the best defenses against conspiracies is simply not being hated or despised by the public. A conspirator always believes that killing the prince will please the people. But if the conspirator thinks the assassination will anger the people, he will never have the courage to go through with it. The obstacles facing a conspirator are already massive. Experience shows that there have been many conspiracies, but very few have succeeded. A conspirator cannot act alone, and he can only recruit people he thinks are unhappy. But the moment you share your plot with an unhappy man, you give him exactly what he needs to be happy, the chance to betray you for a reward. When he sees guaranteed profit in betraying you, and nothing but deadly risk in joining you, he would have to be an incredibly loyal friend, or an insanely stubborn enemy of the prince, to keep your secret. To put it simply, the conspirator lives with nothing but fear, paranoia, and the terrifying prospect of execution. The prince, on the other hand, has the majesty of his office, the laws, his allies, and the entire state protecting him. Add the goodwill of the people to all that, and it becomes almost impossible for anyone to be foolish enough to conspire against him. Usually, a conspirator only has to fear the danger of carrying out the plot. But when he is up against the people's goodwill, he must also fear what happens after the crime. The people will become his enemy, and he will have absolutely no hope of escape. I could give endless examples of this, but I will stick to one that happened during our father's time. Lord Annibale Bentivogli, the Prince of Bologna and grandfather of the current Annibale, was murdered by the Cankai family, who had conspired against him. The only member of the Bentivogli family left was Giovanni, who was just a baby. But immediately after the assassination, the people rose up and slaughtered every single member of the Cankai family. This happened because the House of Bentivogli enjoyed massive popular goodwill in Bologna at the time. The goodwill was so strong that even though there was no one left in Bologna to rule the state after Annibale's death, the citizens took drastic action. They heard that there was a distant relative of the Bentivogli family in Florence, a man who had lived his whole life believing he was the son of a blacksmith. The people of Bologna went all the way to Florence, brought him back, and handed him control of their city. He ruled until Giovanni was old enough to take over. Therefore, a prince should not worry much about conspiracies if his people respect him. But if the people are hostile and hate him, he must fear everything and everyone. Well-organized states and wise princes always make sure not to push the nobles to desperation, while also keeping the common people satisfied and happy. This is one of the most important jobs a prince has. France is one of the best organized and governed kingdoms of our time. It has many excellent institutions that protect the king's freedom and security. The most important of these is the parliament and its authority. The founder of the French kingdom knew how ambitious and arrogant the nobility could be, and he realized they needed a bit in their mouths to restrain them. At the same time, he knew the common people hated the nobles out of fear, and he wanted to protect the people. But he did not want the king to carry the burden of this conflict. If the king favored the people, the nobles would blame him. If he favored the nobles, the people would blame him. So, the founder created an independent judge, the parliament. This judge could crush the powerful nobles and protect the common people, all without the king taking any blame. There could not be a better, wiser, or safer system for the king and his kingdom. From this, we can draw a crucial rule: princes should delegate unpopular duties to others and keep the popular, gracious duties for themselves. Again, a prince must respect his nobles, but he must never let the common people hate him. Some people who have studied the lives and deaths of the Roman emperors might think they prove my theory wrong. Many of these emperors lived noble lives and showed great strength of character, yet they still lost their empire or were murdered by their own subjects. To answer these arguments, I will examine the characters of a few emperors and show that their ruins were caused by exactly the things I have described. I will focus on the most important details for anyone studying that era. It is enough to look at the emperors who took the throne from the philosopher Marcus Aurelius down to Maximinus. These men were Marcus, his son Commodus, Pertinax, Julian, Severus, his son Antoninus Caracalla, Macrinus, Heliogabalus, Alexander, and Maximinus. First, you must understand a unique problem these Roman emperors faced. In normal principalities, a ruler only has to manage the ambition of the nobles and the arrogance of the people. But the Roman emperors had a third, incredibly difficult problem: they had to put up with the cruelty and greed of their own soldiers. This balancing act was so hard that it destroyed many emperors. It was nearly impossible to satisfy both the soldiers and the people at the same time. The people loved peace, so they preferred a quiet, modest prince. But the soldiers loved a warlike prince who was bold, cruel, and greedy. The soldiers wanted the prince to unleash those brutal qualities on the people so they could double their pay and satisfy their own greed and cruelty. Because of this, any emperor who lacked the sheer authority to control both groups, whether by birth or by reputation, was always overthrown. Most of them, especially the newly crowned emperors who saw the impossible conflict between these two factions, chose to satisfy the soldiers and ignored the suffering of the people. This choice was necessary. Since a prince cannot avoid being hated by someone, he must first try to avoid being hated by everyone. If that is impossible, he must do whatever it takes to avoid the hatred of the most powerful group. Therefore, inexperienced emperors who desperately needed support naturally sided with the powerful soldiers over the people. Whether this strategy worked depended entirely on how well the emperor maintained his authority over the army. This impossible dynamic explains why Marcus, Pertinax, and Alexander all came to tragic ends, even though they lived modest lives, loved justice, hated cruelty, and treated people with kindness. Marcus was the only exception. He lived and died highly honored because he inherited the empire by birthright. He owed his power to neither the soldiers nor the people. Furthermore, he possessed many brilliant virtues that commanded immense respect. Because of this, he successfully kept both factions in line throughout his entire life, and he was never hated or despised. Pertinax, on the other hand, was made emperor against the soldiers' wishes. The army had grown used to living widely under Commodus, and they refused to accept the honest, disciplined life Pertinax tried to force on them. This made the soldiers hate him. Adding to their hatred was contempt for his old age. As a result, Pertinax was overthrown at the very beginning of his rule. You must note here that a prince can earn hatred just as easily by doing good deeds as by doing bad ones. Therefore, as I said before, a prince who wants to keep his state is very often forced to do evil. If the group you rely on to stay in power, whether it is the people, the soldiers, or the nobles, is corrupt, you have to stoop to their level and indulge them. When that happens, doing good deeds will only destroy you. Now consider Alexander, a man of such incredible goodness that during his 14 years in power, he never put a single person to death without a trial. Yet he was seen as weak and feminine, a man controlled by his mother. He became utterly despised. The army conspired against him and slaughtered him. Now look at the opposite extremes: Commodus, Severus, Antoninus Caracalla, and Maximinus. You will find them all to be cruel and greedy men. To satisfy their soldiers, they did not hesitate to commit every horrifying crime imaginable against the people. All of them, except Severus, came to brutal ends. Severus had so much virtue and ability that, by keeping the soldiers loyal, he ruled successfully even while crushing the people. His sheer ability made both the soldiers and the people admire him. The people were left stunned and terrified, while the soldiers remained respectful and satisfied. Because Severus achieved such massive success as a new prince, I want to briefly show how brilliantly he played both the fox and the lion, the two natures every prince must imitate. Severus knew the Emperor Julian was lazy and weak. So Severus convinced his army in Sclavonia, which he commanded, that they needed to march on Rome to avenge the death of Pertinax, who had been killed by the Praetorian Guards. Using this excuse, without ever revealing his ambition for the throne, he marched his army toward Rome. He reached Italy before anyone even knew he had left. When he arrived in Rome, the terrified Senate elected him emperor and executed Julian. After this, Severus wanted to take total control of the empire, but he faced two major threats. In Asia, a commander named Niger had declared himself emperor. In the west, Albinus was also planning to take the throne. Severus knew it was too dangerous to fight both of them at once. He decided to openly attack Niger while tricking Albinus. He wrote a friendly letter to Albinus, claiming the Senate had elected him emperor and that he wanted to share the power. Severus even sent Albinus the title of Caesar and named him co-ruler. Albinus completely fell for it. But after Severus defeated and killed Niger and secured the east, he returned to Rome and complained to the Senate. He claimed Albinus was ungrateful, treacherous, and had tried to murder him. Severus used this as an excuse to hunt Albinus down in France, where he stripped him of his power and his life. If you study Severus carefully, you will see he was a fiercely violent lion and a brilliantly cunning fox. He was feared and respected by everyone, and his army never hated him. It is no wonder this new man held his massive empire so effectively. His legendary reputation protected him from the intense hatred the people normally would have felt toward his violence. His son Antoninus Caracalla was also a prominent man with excellent qualities. The people admired him, and the soldiers accepted him. He was a ruthless warrior who could endure endless hardship and despised luxury, which made the armies love him. However, his savagery and cruelty were completely unheard of. After committing countless individual murders, he slaughtered a massive portion of the population of Rome and all the people of Alexandria. The entire world hated him, and even those in his inner circle feared him. Eventually, he was murdered by a centurion right in the middle of his own army. You must note that a prince cannot avoid assassinations carried out by a desperate, fearless individual who does not care if he dies. Anyone who has no fear of death can strike the fatal blow. But a prince should not worry about these attacks too much because they are incredibly rare. He simply must be careful not to deeply offend anyone in his inner circle or state service. Antoninus failed to take this basic precaution. He had violently humiliated and murdered the centurion's brother, and he threatened the centurion every single day. Yet, insanely, he kept this very man in his personal bodyguard. It was a reckless move, and it destroyed him. Now let us look at Commodus. He had the easiest path to keeping the empire because he inherited it from his father, Marcus. All he had to do was follow his father's footsteps to keep both the people and the soldiers happy. But Commodus was naturally vicious and brutal. To unleash his greed on the people, he pampered and corrupted the army. At the same time, he completely destroyed his own dignity. He constantly went down into the arenas to fight gladiators and engaged in vile, disgusting behavior completely beneath an emperor. the soldiers quickly grew to despise him. Hated by the people and despised by the army, a conspiracy formed, and he was assassinated. Finally, we have Maximinus. He was a brutal, warlike man. When the armies got sick of Alexander's weakness, they murdered him and elected Maximinus to the throne. But Maximinus did not last long. Two things made him totally hated and despised. First, he came from a pathetic background. He used to be a sheep herder in Thrace. Everyone knew this, and they considered it a massive humiliation. Second, when he was elected, he delayed going to Rome to take the imperial throne. Instead, he gained a terrifying reputation for extreme cruelty by letting his deputies terrorize Rome and the rest of the empire. The entire world raged against his low birth and trembled at his savagery. Africa rebelled first, followed by the Senate, the people of Rome, and all of Italy. Even his own army turned against him. While struggling to besiege the city of Aquileia, his soldiers grew disgusted by his cruelty. Realizing he had too many enemies to fight back, they lost their fear of him and murdered him. I will not bother discussing Heliogabalus, Macrinus, or Julian. They were utterly pathetic and quickly wiped out. I will conclude by saying that princes today do not face this extreme problem of perfectly satisfying their armies. Modern princes have to indulge their soldiers a little, but the problem is easily managed. None of today's princes have standing armies deeply entrenched in the government and administration of the provinces, like the Roman armies were. Back then, it was more important to satisfy the soldiers than the people. Today, except for the Turkish Sultan and the Egyptian Sultan, it is much more important for every prince to satisfy the people, simply because the people are now more powerful. I exclude the Turkish Sultan because he always keeps 12,000 infantrymen and 15,000 cavalrymen at his side. The total security and strength of his kingdom depend on them. He must prioritize keeping their loyalty above any concern for the people. The Egyptian Sultan is similar. His kingdom is completely controlled by the military, so he must also secure their loyalty before worrying about the people. It is important to note that the Egyptian Sultan state is totally unique. It operates a lot like the Christian papacy. It cannot be called a hereditary principality, nor is it a newly formed one. When the old ruler dies, his sons do not inherit the throne. Instead, the new ruler is elected by a council of authorities, and the previous ruler's sons remain mere noblemen. Because this is an ancient tradition, it does not suffer from the same problems as a brand new principality. Even though the ruler is new, the foundation of the state is old and perfectly designed to welcome him exactly as if he were a hereditary king. Returning to our main subject, anyone who thinks about this will realize that the Roman emperors were destroyed by either hatred or contempt. You will also understand how, even though these rulers took totally different approaches, only one in each camp found a happy end, while the rest were ruined. It would have been useless and dangerous for Pertinax and Alexander, as new princes, to copy Marcus, who was born into power. Likewise, it was fatal for Caracalla, Commodus, and Maximinus to copy Severus, because they simply lacked the absolute virtue and talent to pull off his brutal methods. Therefore, a new prince cannot act like Marcus, nor does he have to act like Severus. Instead, he must take from Severus the ruthless tactics necessary to establish a new state, and take from Marcus the glorious, just methods needed to maintain a state that is already stable and secure. Chapter 20. Are fortresses, and many other things to which princes often resort, advantageous or hurtful? 1. To secure their hold on power, some princes have disarmed their subjects. Others have kept their subject towns divided by factions. Some have deliberately provoked enemies against themselves, while others have worked to win over those they initially distrusted. Some princes have built fortresses, others have torn them down and destroyed them. You cannot make a final judgment on all these methods without knowing the specific details of the states where these decisions were made. Even so, I will speak as broadly about this as the subject allows. 2. No new prince has ever disarmed his subjects. In fact, when he finds them unarmed, he always arms them. By arming them, those weapons become yours. The men you previously distrusted become loyal, while those who were already loyal stay that way, and your subjects become your active supporters. You cannot possibly arm everyone. However, by providing benefits to those you do arm, you can handle the rest of the population more easily. The armed men become indebted to you because of their special treatment. The unarmed men will understand and excuse this difference, recognizing that those who face the most danger and provide the greatest service deserve the greatest rewards. But the moment you disarm your subjects, you offend them. You show that you distrust them, suspecting them of either cowardice or disloyalty, and both of these opinions will breed hatred against you. Since you cannot remain unarmed, you will be forced to rely on mercenaries. I have already discussed the poor character of mercenary troops. Even if they were good, they would never be enough to defend you against powerful enemies and a distrustful population. Therefore, a new prince in a new principality has always distributed weapons. History is full of such examples. However, things change when a prince acquires a new state and adds it as a province to his existing territory. In that case, you must disarm the men of that new state, except for those who supported you in taking it. Even those supporters, over time and when the opportunity arises, should be made soft and weak. You must manage things so that all the armed men in the entire state are your own soldiers, the ones who lived near you and served you in your original territory. 3. Our ancestors, and those considered wise, used to say it was necessary to hold Pistoia through factions and Pisa through fortresses. With this in mind, they encouraged quarrels in some of their subject towns to control them more easily. This might have worked well enough in those times when Italy was relatively stable and balanced. I do not believe, however, that this can be used as a rule today. I do not think factions are ever useful. In fact, it is certain that when an enemy attacks divided cities, you will quickly lose them. The weaker faction will always side with the invading forces, and the remaining faction will not be strong enough to resist. The Venetians likely followed this logic when they encouraged the Guelph and Ghibelline factions in their subject cities. Although they never let the disputes escalate to bloodshed, they actively fed these conflicts so the citizens would stay distracted by their differences and never unite against Venice. As we saw, this did not turn out as expected. After the Venetian defeat at Vela, one of those factions immediately gathered courage and seized control of the state. These methods only reveal a prince's weakness. A strong, vigorous principality will never allow such factions to exist. Dividing your subjects might make them easier to manage during times of peace, but the moment war breaks out, this strategy is proven completely useless. For, without a doubt, princes achieve greatness when they overcome the difficulties and obstacles placed in their way. Therefore, when Fortuna wants to make a new prince great, she forces enemies to rise up and plot against him. A new prince needs to build his reputation much more than a hereditary one. By giving him enemies, Fortuna gives him the chance to defeat them. He can then use the very ladder his enemies built to climb to even greater heights. For this reason, many believe that a wise prince should carefully and secretly encourage some hostility against himself when the opportunity arises. By crushing this manufactured opposition, his fame and power will only grow stronger. 5. Princes, especially new ones, have often found more loyalty and real help from the men they initially distrusted than from the men they trusted from the start. Pandolfo Petrucci, the Prince of Siena, ruled his state largely by relying on those he had once suspected. However, you cannot make a broad generalization about this, because it varies depending on the specific people involved. I will only say this: if the men who were hostile at the beginning of your reign need your support to maintain their own positions, you can win them over with incredible ease. They will be forced to serve you with absolute loyalty because they know they must work hard to erase your bad impression of them through their actions. As a result, a prince always gets more value out of these former enemies than from those who serve him with too much security and end up neglecting his affairs. Since the subject requires it, I must warn any prince who has acquired a new state through the secret help of its citizens. You must carefully consider why those people helped you. If they were not motivated by a natural affection for you, but simply by hatred for their previous government, you will have a very difficult time keeping them friendly. It will be completely impossible to satisfy them. If you carefully weigh the reasons for this, looking at examples from both ancient and modern history, you will find a clear truth. It is much easier to make friends with the men who were perfectly happy under the old government, and who are therefore your natural enemies, than it is to keep the friendship of the malcontents who helped you seize power. 6. Princes have often built fortresses to hold their states more securely. These fortresses act as a bit and bridle to control anyone who might plot against them, while also providing a safe refuge from a sudden attack. I praise this method because it has been used since ancient times. Even so, in our own time, Niccolò Machiavelli demolished 2 fortresses in Città di Castello just so he could keep control of that state. When Guido Ubaldo, the Duke of Urbino, returned to his territory after being driven out by Cesare Borgia, he completely leveled all the fortresses in that province. He decided that without them, it would be much harder to lose his state again. The Bentivogli family came to the exact same conclusion when they returned to Bologna. Therefore, fortresses are only useful depending on the circumstances. If they help you in one way, they will hurt you in another. You can break the issue down like this: a prince who fears his own people more than he fears foreigners should build fortresses. However, a prince who fears foreigners more than his own people should leave them alone. The castle of Milan, built by Francesco Sforza, has caused and will continue to cause more trouble for the Sforza family than any other source of disorder in the state. For this reason, the best possible fortress you can have is simply not being hated by your people. Even if you have the strongest fortresses, they will not save you if the people hate you. Once the people take up arms against you, there will never be a shortage of foreigners ready to step in and help them. In our times, we have not seen fortresses benefit a single prince, with the one exception of the Countess of Forli after her husband, Count Girolamo, was killed. Her fortress allowed her to survive the attack of the people and wait safely for backup from Milan to recover her state. At that specific time, the political situation meant no foreigners were available to assist the rebelling people. But those same fortresses were entirely useless to her later on when Cesare Borgia attacked her, and her people, who hated her, joined forces with the foreign invaders. Therefore, both then and before, it would have been much safer for her to avoid being hated by the people than to rely on fortresses. Considering all of this, I will praise the prince who builds fortresses just as much as the one who does not. But I will fiercely blame any prince who places his trust entirely in fortresses and does not care at all if his people hate him. This historical note refers to Catherine Sforza, the daughter of Galeazzo Sforza and Lucrezia Landriani. It was to the Countess of Forli that Machiavelli himself was sent as an envoy in 1499. A letter from Fortunati to the Countess announced the appointment, stating that he had met with the lords to find out who would be sent. They told him that Niccolò Machiavelli, a learned young Florentine nobleman and secretary to the Lords of the Ten, was to leave with him immediately. Chapter 21. How a prince should conduct himself so as to gain renown. Nothing earns a prince as much respect as great achievements and setting a remarkable example. Consider Ferdinand of Aragon, the current king of Spain. He can practically be called a new prince, because he rose from being an insignificant king to becoming the most prominent monarch in Christendom through fame and glory. If you examine his actions, you will find them all great, and some of them truly extraordinary. At the start of his reign, he attacked Granada. This campaign became the foundation of his empire. He launched it quietly at first, without fear of interference. He kept the minds of the Castilian barons occupied with the war, preventing them from anticipating any sudden political changes. As a result, they didn't even realize he was slowly gaining power and authority over them. Using money from the church and the people, he was able to maintain his armies. That long war laid the groundwork for the military expertise that has distinguished his rule ever since. Furthermore, he consistently used religion as an excuse to undertake even more ambitious schemes. With a kind of pious cruelty, he dedicated himself to driving the Moors out of his kingdom and cleansing his lands of them. There could not be a more admirable or rare example of this strategy. Using that same religious cloak, he invaded Africa, descended upon Italy, and has now finally attacked France. His achievements and designs have always been massive. They have kept his people in a constant state of suspense, admiration, and distraction. Because his campaigns rolled out one after another in rapid succession, his enemies were never given the time or space to organize a steady resistance against him. It also greatly helps a prince to set unusual examples in domestic affairs, much like the stories told of Messer Bernabo of Milan. Whenever someone in civil life did something extraordinary, whether good or bad, Bernabo would find a highly public way to reward or punish them. Above all else, a prince should always strive in every action to build a reputation as a great and remarkable man. A prince is also highly respected when he is either a true friend or a straightforward enemy. This means declaring yourself purely in favor of one side against another, without any hesitation or reservation. This approach will always be more beneficial than remaining neutral. If two of your powerful neighbors go to war, they are either strong enough that you must fear the winner, or they are not. In either case, it is always to your advantage to pick a side and fight fiercely. If you refuse to declare yourself in the first scenario, you will inevitably become the prey of the winner. The defeated side will be pleased and satisfied by your ruin, and you will have no excuses to offer, and no one to protect or shelter you. The winner does not want unreliable friends who refuse to help in difficult times. The loser will not harbor you, because you were unwilling to draw your sword and share his fate. Anchises entered Greece after being invited by the Aetolians to drive out the Romans. He sent envoys to the Achaeans, who were friends of the Romans, urging them to stay neutral. The Romans, however, pressured the Achaeans to take up arms. When the Achaean council debated the issue, Anchises' ambassador advised them to remain neutral. The Roman ambassador replied, "As for the claim that it is better and more advantageous for your state not to interfere in our war, nothing could be more wrong. By not interfering, you will be left without favor or consideration, entirely at the mercy of the conqueror. It will always be the case that your enemies will demand your neutrality, while your friends will beg you to take up arms and declare your support." Irresolute princes usually choose the path of neutrality to avoid immediate danger, and they are almost always ruined as a result. But if a prince boldly declares himself for one side, and his ally wins, the victor is indebted to him. Even if the victor is powerful and has the prince at his mercy, a bond of friendship has been established. Men are rarely so shameless as to show monumental ingratitude by turning on an ally. Besides, victories are never so absolute that the winner can ignore all standards of justice. On the other hand, if your ally loses, he may still shelter you. As long as he is able, he will help you, and you become partners in a fortune that might rise again. In the second scenario, where the warring parties are not strong enough to threaten you, it is even smarter to take a side. By doing so, you are helping to destroy one party with the help of another, when that second party should have been trying to save the first if they had any sense. When your ally inevitably wins with your help, he remains entirely at your mercy. Here, it is crucial to note that a prince must never ally with someone more powerful than himself for the purpose of attacking others, unless absolutely necessary. If you win, you are entirely at the mercy of your more powerful ally, and princes must do everything they can to avoid being at the mercy of anyone. The Venetians allied with France against the Duke of Milan. This alliance caused their ruin, and it could easily have been avoided. But when such an alliance cannot be avoided, as happened to the Florentines when the Pope and Spain sent armies to attack Lombardy, the prince must choose a side for the reasons explained above. No government should ever imagine that it can always choose perfectly safe policies. Instead, you must expect to face highly uncertain options. In ordinary affairs, trying to avoid one problem usually means running straight into another. True prudence consists of knowing how to evaluate the nature of these problems and choosing the lesser evil. A prince should also present himself as a patron of talent, honoring those who excel in any profession. At the same time, he must encourage his citizens to practice their trades in peace, whether in commerce, agriculture, or any other field. A man should not hesitate to improve his property for fear of it being confiscated, and another should not be afraid to open a business for fear of excessive taxes. Instead, the prince should offer rewards to anyone willing to take on these ventures, or to anyone who seeks to enrich his city or state in any way. Finally, a prince should entertain his people with festivals and public spectacles at appropriate times of the year. Since every city is divided into guilds or neighborhoods, he should show respect to these groups, attend their gatherings occasionally, and serve as an example of courtesy and generosity. However, in doing so, he must always maintain the absolute majesty and dignity of his position. He can never allow his status to be diminished in any way. Chapter 22. Concerning the secretaries of princes. Choosing the right ministers is extremely important for a prince. Their quality depends entirely on the prince's good judgment. The very first impression people form of a ruler and his intelligence comes from observing the men he surrounds himself with. If they are capable and loyal, the prince is always considered wise, because he knew how to identify talent and keep it faithful. But if they are incompetent or disloyal, people will judge the prince poorly. His first major mistake was choosing them. Anyone who knew Antonio da Venafro as the minister for Pandolfo Petrucci, the Prince of Siena, immediately considered Pandolfo to be a highly intelligent man just for hiring him. There are three types of human intellect. The first type understands things independently. The second type understands things when they are explained by others. The third type understands neither by itself nor through others. The first kind is excellent, the second is good, and the third is entirely useless. Therefore, even if Pandolfo did not have the first type of intellect, he certainly had the second. Whenever a ruler has the judgment to distinguish the good and bad in what others say and do, he can evaluate his minister's actions. Even if he lacks originality himself, he can still praise the good and correct the bad. This way, the minister knows he cannot deceive his prince, and he is forced to stay honest. How can a prince judge a minister? There is one test that never fails. If you see a minister thinking more about his own interests than yours, and constantly looking for his own personal profit in everything he does, that man will never be a good minister. You will never be able to trust him. A man who holds another person's state in his hands must never think of himself. He must always think of his prince, and he must never pay attention to matters that do not concern the prince. On the other hand, the prince must also do his part to keep his minister honest. He should reward him, honor him, enrich him, and treat him with kindness. The prince should share the honors and the heavy responsibilities of ruling with him. At the same time, the prince must make it clear that the minister cannot stand alone without the prince. By doing this, the minister's abundance of honors and wealth will stop him from desiring more. And his many responsibilities will make him fear any sudden political changes. When princes and ministers treat each other this way, they can trust each other completely. When it is any other way, the result will always be disastrous for one or the other. Chapter 23. How flatterers should be avoided. I must not skip over a critical topic. Princes constantly face a specific danger, and they will only survive it if they are highly careful and sharp. I am talking about flatterers. Courts are completely full of them. People are naturally so pleased with themselves and so easily blind to their own flaws that it is incredibly hard to escape this pest. But when a ruler tries to defend himself against flattery, he risks losing the respect of his people. The only true way to protect yourself from flatterers is to make men understand that telling you the truth will not offend you. However, if absolutely anyone is allowed to tell you the truth, you will quickly lose their respect. Therefore, a wise prince must take a third approach. He should choose the wise men in his state and give only them the freedom to tell him the truth. Even then, they should only speak about the things he specifically asks about, and absolutely nothing else. However, he should question these advisors on everything. He must listen to their opinions and then form his own conclusions independently. When dealing with his council, both individually and as a group, the prince must act so that every advisor knows this. The more freely they speak, the more the prince will favor them. Outside of this select group, he should refuse to listen to anyone. Once he makes a decision, he must follow it through relentlessly and stand firm in his choices. A ruler who does anything else will either be destroyed by flatterers or constantly change his mind based on conflicting advice. Either way, he will lose all respect. Let me offer a modern example. Fra Luca, an agent for Maximilian I, the present emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, once spoke about His Majesty. Maximilian, born in 1459, became deeply involved in Italian politics through his marriages to Mary, daughter of Charles the Bold, and later to Bianca Sforza. Fra Luca said that the emperor consulted with absolutely no one, yet he never got his way in anything. This happened because Maximilian followed a practice completely opposite to the rules I just laid out. The emperor is a highly secretive man. He never shares his plans with anyone, and he refuses to listen to any opinions. But as soon as he tries to put his plans into action, they are revealed to the public. Instantly, the men around him start pushing back and obstructing his efforts. Because the emperor is weak and easily swayed, he changes his mind. As a result, whatever he does one day, he undoes the very next day. No one ever understands what he actually wants or intends to do, and absolutely no one can rely on his decisions. A prince must always seek advice, but only when he wants it, not when others want to give it. In fact, he should strongly discourage anyone from offering opinions unless he specifically asks for them. However, he needs to constantly ask questions. After asking, he must listen patiently to the answers. Furthermore, if he ever discovers that someone held back the truth for any reason, the prince must unleash his anger and make them regret it. Some people believe that if a prince appears wise, it is not due to his own natural ability, but simply because he has good advisors around him. These people are completely wrong. This is an unbreakable rule: a prince who is not wise on his own will never be able to take good advice. The only exception is if he accidentally hands total control over to one incredibly smart man. In that rare case, his state might run well, but it will not last long. That clever governor will quickly overthrow the prince and steal his power. On the other hand, if an inexperienced prince tries to take advice from multiple advisors, he will never get unified answers. He will also have no idea how to bring their conflicting opinions together. Every single advisor will selfishly focus on his own personal interests. The prince will not know how to control them or see through their hidden agendas. You cannot expect anything better, because men will always betray you unless they are forced to be honest. Therefore, the conclusion is clear: good advice, no matter where it comes from, only exists because the prince is wise. A prince does not become wise simply by getting good advice. Chapter 24. Why the princes of Italy have lost their states. If a new prince carefully follows the advice I have laid out, he will seem well established. He will instantly become more secure and firmly rooted in his state than if he had ruled there for generations. The actions of a new prince are watched much more closely than those of a hereditary ruler. When those actions show clear ability, they win over more men and build far stronger loyalty than ancient bloodlines ever could. Men are always drawn more to the present than to the past. When they find the present conditions good, they enjoy them and look no further. In fact, they will fiercely defend a new prince, as long as he does not fail them in other ways. Thus, a new prince will win double the glory, first for creating a new principality, and second for strengthening it with good laws, strong armies, reliable allies, and an excellent example. On the other hand, it is a double disgrace for a man born as a prince to lose his state because of his own incompetence. Look at the rulers who have lost their states in Italy in our time, such as the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and others. You will find they all shared one common flaw regarding their military forces, for all the reasons I have already explained at length. Furthermore, you will see that some of them either made an enemy of the people, or, if the people were friendly, they failed to secure the loyalty of the nobles. As long as a ruler avoids these specific mistakes, he will not lose a state that has enough power to put an army in the field. Consider Philip of Macedon. This is not the father of Alexander the Great, but the Philip who was defeated by Titus Quintius. He had very little territory compared to the massive power of Rome and Greece that attacked him. Yet, because he was a warlike man who knew how to win over the people and secure the loyalty of his nobles, he managed to fight off his enemies for many years. Even though he eventually lost control of a few cities, he still held onto his kingdom. Therefore, our Italian princes should not blame Fortuna for the loss of their states after holding them for so many years. They should blame their own laziness. During times of peace, they never imagined that things could change. It is a common human flaw to fail to prepare for a storm while the weather is calm. When bad times finally arrived, these princes thought only of running away instead of defending themselves. They foolishly hoped that the people, disgusted by the arrogance of the conquerors, would invite them back. This strategy might be acceptable if all other options have failed, but it is a terrible mistake to neglect every other solution just to rely on that one hope. You should never allow yourself to fall simply because you believe someone else will eventually pick you up. Most of the time, that rescue never comes. And even if it does, it will not make you secure, because any deliverance that does not depend on you is completely useless. The only reliable, certain, and lasting defenses are the ones that depend entirely on yourself and your own virtue. Chapter 25. What fortune can affect in human affairs and how to withstand her. I know that many people have believed, and still believe, that God and fortune control the world's affairs. They think human wisdom cannot change how things play out, and that our efforts are ultimately useless. Because of this, they argue that we should not sweat the details, but simply let chance run its course. This belief has grown stronger in our own times. We have witnessed immense and unpredictable upheavals happening every single day, completely defying human imagination. Sometimes, when I think about this, I find myself somewhat agreeing with them. Nevertheless, we cannot let our free will be entirely extinguished. I believe the truth is that Fortuna controls about half of our actions. But she still leaves us to direct the other half, or perhaps just a little less. I compare Fortuna to one of those raging, destructive rivers. When it floods, it overflows the plains, sweeps away trees and buildings, and tears the soil from one place to dump it in another. Everyone runs from it. Everyone yields to its violent fury, completely unable to stop it. Yet, even though rivers act this way, it does not mean men are helpless. When the weather is calm, people can build defenses, dams, and barriers. That way, when the waters rise again, the flood will be channeled through canals. Its force will no longer be so wild or dangerous. The exact same thing happens with Fortuna. She shows her crushing power wherever no virtue has been prepared to resist her. She directs her fury exactly where she knows no barriers or defenses have been built to hold her back. Now look at Italy. It is the epicenter of these massive political changes, and it is the very place that set them in motion. You will see that Italy is an open country, completely stripped of barriers and lacking any defense. If it had been defended by the proper virtue, just like Germany, Spain, and France, things would have been different. Either these foreign invasions would not have caused such massive upheavals, or they would never have happened in the first place. I consider this enough to say about resisting fortune in general. But zooming in on the specifics, we often see a prince thriving today and utterly ruined tomorrow, even though his character and behavior have not changed at all. I believe this happens first for the reasons we have already discussed at length. Namely, a prince who relies entirely on fortune will be destroyed the moment his luck changes. I also believe that a leader will only succeed if he adapts his actions to the spirit of the times. If his methods clash with the current era, he will fail. Men all want the same ultimate goals, glory and wealth. Yet we see them trying to get there using completely different methods. One moves with caution, while another rushes in. One uses brute force, and another uses clever skill. One is incredibly patient, while another is exactly the opposite. Surprisingly, each of these totally different methods can lead to success. You can also look at two cautious men, one achieves his goal, and the other fails completely. Similarly, you can see two men succeed equally well using opposite strategies, with one being cautious and the other aggressive. Why does this happen? It all comes down to whether or not their methods fit the spirit of the times. This proves my point. Two men can act differently and get the exact same result. Meanwhile, two men can act exactly the same way, but one achieves his goal while the other fails. The rise and fall of a prince's power also depends on this principle. Suppose a prince rules with caution and patience. If the times and circumstances demand those exact traits, he will be highly successful. His fortune is made. But if the times change, he will be ruined unless he changes his strategy to match. The problem is, you rarely find a man flexible enough to adapt to these shifts. This is partly because a man cannot easily go against his own nature. It is also because, if a man has always succeeded by acting a certain way, you can never convince him to abandon that winning formula. So, when the time comes for the cautious man to be aggressive, he has no idea how to do it. As a result, he is destroyed. If he could have only changed his character to match the times, his fortune would never have turned against him. Take Pope Julius II as an example. He acted aggressively and impulsively in everything he did. Fortunately for him, the times and circumstances matched his bold nature so perfectly that he always succeeded. Consider his first military campaign against Bologna, while Messer Giovanni Bentivogli was still alive. The Venetians opposed this move. So did the King of Spain. Julius was even still negotiating the plan with the King of France. Despite all this hesitation, he personally marched into battle with his usual relentless energy. This sudden, bold move completely paralyzed Spain and the Venetians. The Venetians froze out of fear, while Spain held back because they wanted to recover the Kingdom of Naples. At the same time, Julius forced the King of France's hand. Seeing the Pope already making a move, the French king realized he needed the Pope as an ally to crush the Venetians. It became impossible for France to refuse him military support. Through sheer reckless aggression, Julius achieved what no other pope could have managed with all the careful human wisdom in the world. If he had waited safely in Rome to organize his plans and secure his alliances, like any normal pope would have done, he would have failed completely. The King of France would have invented 1,000 excuses, and everyone else would have raised 1,000 fears. I will skip over his other actions, as they all followed the same aggressive pattern, and they all succeeded. His short life meant he never had to experience the harsh flip side of this coin. If times had changed and required him to act with caution, he would have been utterly ruined. He would never have been able to change the aggressive nature he was born with. I conclude, therefore, that Fortuna is always changing, while men remain stubborn in their ways. As long as a man's nature perfectly aligns with Fortuna, he will be wildly successful. But the moment they fall out of sync, he will fail miserably. Personally, I believe it is always better to be aggressive than cautious. Fortuna is a woman, and if you want to keep her under your control, you have to beat her and force her into submission. History shows she is much more willing to let herself be mastered by bold, aggressive men than by those who act coldly and carefully. Because she is a woman, she is always drawn to young men. They are less cautious, more violent, and they command her with absolute audacity. Chapter 26. An exhortation to liberate Italy from the barbarians. I have carefully considered everything discussed so far. I have asked myself whether the present times are right for a new prince. I have wondered if there are elements that give a wise and capable leader the opportunity to introduce a new order. Such a new order would bring him honor and do good for the people of this country. It seems to me that so many things are coming together to favor a new prince right now. In fact, I have never known a time more fit than the present. As I said before, it was necessary for the Israelites to be enslaved in Egypt to reveal the ability of Moses. It was necessary for the Persians to be oppressed by the Medes to discover the greatness of Cyrus. It was necessary for the Athenians to be scattered to show the capabilities of Theseus. In the same way, right now, it was necessary for Italy to be reduced to her current extreme misery to discover the virtue of an Italian spirit. She had to be more enslaved than the Hebrews, more oppressed than the Persians, and more scattered than the Athenians. She had to be without a leader, without order, beaten, stripped down, torn apart, overrun, and forced to endure every kind of desolation. Recently, there was a spark of hope in one man. This made us think he was ordained by God for our redemption. However, at the peak of his career, Fortuna rejected him. Now Italy, left almost completely lifeless, waits for someone to heal her wounds. She waits for a leader to end the ravaging and plundering of Lombardy. She waits for someone to stop the swindling and heavy taxing in the Kingdom of Naples and in Tuscany. She needs a leader to cleanse the sores that have festered for so long. You can see how she begs God to send someone who will deliver her from these cruel wrongs and barbarous insults. You can also see that she is completely ready and willing to follow a banner, if only someone will raise it. Right now, there is no one in whom she can place more hope than in your illustrious house. Your family has the courage and Fortuna, favored by God and by the Church, of which it is now the head. Your house can easily become the leader of this redemption. This will not be difficult if you keep in mind the actions and lives of the men I just named. Those men were great and wonderful, but they were still only men. None of them had a better opportunity than the one offered today. Their enterprises were no more just or easier than this one. God was no more their friend than he is yours. We have great justice on our side, because a war is just when it is necessary. Arms are sacred when they are our only hope. There is immense willingness here, and where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great, as long as you follow the example of the men I have highlighted. Beyond this, God has shown extraordinary signs without equal. The sea has divided. A cloud has led the way. The rock has poured out water. It has rained manna. Everything has contributed to your greatness. You must do the rest. God is not willing to do everything, because He does not want to take away our free will and that share of glory which rightfully belongs to us. It is no surprise if none of the Italians I mentioned before were able to accomplish what is now expected of your illustrious house. Over so many revolutions and military campaigns in Italy, it has always seemed as though our military virtue was completely exhausted. This happened because the old systems were broken, and no one knew how to invent new ones. Nothing brings a man more honor than establishing new laws and new institutions when he first rises to power. When these foundations are solid and dignified, they make him revered and admired. In Italy, there is no shortage of opportunities to introduce these new forms. There is tremendous strength in the limbs here, even if the head is weak. Look closely at the duels and hand-to-hand combat. You will see how superior the Italians are in strength, dexterity, and cleverness. But when it comes to whole armies, they do not compare. This springs entirely from the weakness of the leaders. Those who are capable refuse to obey. Everyone thinks they know best. Until now, no one has stood out enough, either through their own virtue or fortuna, to make the others yield. This is why, for the past 20 years of constant fighting, an all-Italian army has always failed miserably. The first proof of this was at Illinois Taro, followed by Alessandria, Capua, Genoa, Vela, Bologna, and Mestre. Therefore, if your illustrious house wishes to follow those remarkable men who redeemed their countries, you must first do one essential thing. As the true foundation of every enterprise, you must provide yourself with your own national forces. There can be no truer, more faithful, or better soldiers. Individually they are good, but together they will become much better when they find themselves commanded, honored, and maintained by their own prince. Therefore, it is absolutely necessary to prepare these forces so you can defend yourself against foreigners using Italian strength. Swiss and Spanish infantry may be considered terrifying, but they both have a critical flaw. A third type of force could not only oppose them but confidently overthrow them. The Spaniards cannot stand against cavalry, and the Swiss are terrified of infantry when they meet them in close combat. Because of this, as we have seen and will see again, the Spaniards cannot resist French cavalry, and the Swiss are crushed by Spanish infantry. We may not have seen a complete proof of the latter, but there was strong evidence of it at the Battle of Ravenna. There, the Spanish infantry clashed with German battalions, who used the same tactics as the Swiss. The Spaniards, using their physical agility and their small shields, got in under the long pikes of the Germans. They were safe to attack while the Germans stood helpless. If the cavalry had not charged in, the Spaniards would have slaughtered them all. Therefore, knowing the defects of both the Swiss and Spanish infantries, you can invent a new one. This new force will resist cavalry and not be afraid of infantry. You do not need to create entirely new weapons, you just need to alter the old tactics. These are exactly the kinds of innovations that give reputation and power to a new prince. This opportunity must not be allowed to pass. Italy must finally see her liberator appear. I cannot express the overwhelming love that would greet him in all these provinces that have suffered so much from these foreign invasions. Imagine the thirst for revenge, the stubborn faith, the devotion, and the tears. What doors would be closed to him? Who would refuse to obey him? What envy would dare stand in his way? What Italian would refuse to bow to him? This barbarian rule stinks in the nostrils of every one of us. Therefore, let your illustrious house take up this charge with the courage and hope that accompany all just enterprises. Under your banner, our native country may be ennobled. Under your leadership, the words of Petrarch will finally come true. Virtue will take up arms against fury. And the battle will be short. For the ancient Vela is not yet dead. In Italian hearts. The prince, Modernized edition. Thank you for reading. We hope you enjoyed this modernized edition of The Prince. By translating the dense, 16th-century aristocratic prose into sharp, conversational English, we hope Machiavelli's timeless observations on power, human nature, and leadership are now even more accessible and engaging. We would love to hear your thoughts on this format. Your feedback helps us improve future editions and select other classics to adapt. Please visit us at jigsawpuzzlehelper.com or send your feedback to tkprof.re@gmail.com. Thank you for your support. A note on the modernization. This edition of The Prince was adapted to simplify the notorious multi-clause sentence structures of the original 1532 translation while retaining the core philosophical concepts, such as virtu and fortuna, and Machiavelli's ruthlessly calculated tone. Audiobook and listening optimization. The narrative was translated from complex historical phrasing into clear, natural prose optimized for spoken flow. Historical context preserved. While the grammar has been modernized, the historical examples and case studies essential to Machiavelli's arguments have been kept entirely intact. Word count comparison. Asterisk original text, tilde 53,000 words. Asterisk modernized edition, tilde 31,000 words. Copyright. Adapted and modernized by TKPROF LLC. Copyright 2026 by TKPROF LLC. All rights reserved. This is a modernized adaptation of a public domain work by Niccolò Machiavelli, originally published in 1532. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law.